Oh hell internet! This is my summary video to Hannah Arendt's The Concept of History, and remember this is just my personal and amateur opinion. My original video was nearly 2 hours long, so this is going to be a little bit more summary-y. Anyway, The Concept of History, Ancient and Modern. It's a good title, but a little dry. It does not get across Arendt's ardent exploration of why the concept of history would be so important, which is because it attaches to the sense of meaning that human beings need to live and to prosper. There are 3 parts to the essay: history and nature, history and earthly immortality, and history and politics. And in part 1, Arendt introduces the concept of history along with its ancient and modern formulations. The ancient concept of history, she says, was focused on the remembrance of great deeds, granting them immortalizing fame, and saving them therefore from oblivion. For the Greeks, this was the ruler of history against which present humans measure themselves, and for the Romans, history was a storehouse of examples, whether worthy or cautionary. Arendt describes ancient poetry and historiography bestowing immortalizing praise on greatness, which is clearly identifiable as that which by itself aspires to immortality, and in this aspect it affords us the catharsis as described by Aristotle. This is how the unexpected becomes part of history and how it provides mortals with a way to take meaning and solace from what went before. The political aspect of this is the immortal space in each body politic where greatness was preserved. This ability of the poets to assign immortalizing praise was the pre-Socratic solution to the paradox of greatness, the fact that greatness is seen in precisely the least durable and least lasting phenomena of the human world: action and speech. But then came Socrates and the Platonic crisis of philosophy. In the wake of Socrates' execution, Plato turned philosophy away from the world towards ideas, and his student Aristotle basically affirmed that man, as the rational animal, could not seriously be thought of as the highest expression of nature. Human action was thus precluded from immortalization. This term, immortalization, could of course represent immortalizing praise as it existed before, but for Plato and Aristotle it was reserved only for those things that philosophy and the vita contemplativa could teach, the actionless and speechless higher realm. This immortalization through atonement with the transcendent was the post-Socratic solution to the problem of human greatness, which was to say that there was no such thing as human greatness, and this, as we shall see, would develop into something radically different again. In moving towards the modern age now, Arendt claims that both historical and natural science have become subjective. Natural scientists hold. To illustrate this, Arendt highlights the quote from Heisenberg on scientific systems, which she brings up again in Essay 8, but she's mostly concerned with the political aspect of this, arguing that the historical sciences have modelled themselves on a previous model of natural science and are now therefore fixated on an ill-fated attempt to save the ancient Aristotelian model of thing-centred meaning. However, this active adherence to the model of the thing as the source of its own meaning would have devastating consequences in removing impartiality from the judgment of history. Arendt takes her model of impartiality from Homer and the early Greek impressions of polis life and the awareness that other people had other opinions. The loss of impartiality is connected to the abandonment of Greek greatness in modernity, greatness being that which obviously by itself aspires to immortality, and it must be impartially judged. Greatness is what introduces the unexpected, and greatness was rejected completely by the Judeo-Christian worldview. It began with the Hebrews and an exaltation of life, especially human life, and then through the development into Christian teaching, the ancient aspect of immortal nature was replaced by an idea of the immortal soul and the immortal realm of ideas, while the mortal world would now pass away. The final emergence of the modern concept of history was preceded by the scientific revolutions which led to what Arendt calls the loss of confidence in the truth-revealing power of the senses, which potentially reduces all judgments to mere matters of sensory taste. The result is world alienation, which adapts a Marxian terminology for her own purpose. For Arendt, the loss of confidence in the truth-revealing power of the senses is explanatorily prior to the loss of God or of reason. And world alienation is a kind of second-order effect of this. As certainty crumbled around them, scientists put their faith in the experiment, with spectacular results, but there were two unforeseen consequences of this move. First of all, experiment is a form of action, and this led to the raising up of action into the modern world. And secondly, world alienation would eventually take us not merely beyond sensation, but beyond thought itself. In Arendt's view, a modern concept of history begins to emerge throughout the medieval period as some sense of continuity emerged, which required a justification. However, it really crystallizes around the first scientific discoveries that radically disagreed with the common sense world as Arendt defines the term. The first political thinker to really synthesize this was Hobbes in the Leviathan, with its many comparisons between body politic and body natural in an attempt to define the political world. Another early modern thinker who took a more constructive view on the loss of confidence in the truth-revealing capacity of the senses was Giambattista Vico, who reasoned that we can really only know what we make ourselves, and so therefore we should turn from the what, the things themselves, to the how, the processes by which they come to be. And so he turned his attention to history as a process. Moving into the modern world, Arendt says that it is technology that has increasingly enabled humans to act into nature, and this has validated science, although it has not bestowed it with authority, and it's also moved us into a world of action as opposed to fabrication, in which we all constantly act into the world while having no indelible record and no true model of the results our actions will cause. And this is why Marxism fails. No, you didn't just turn over 2 pages at once. This irreducible unpredictability means that it is impossible to treat the social sciences with the same process-based approach as the natural sciences employ. And if we try, the result is totalitarianism, the ruthless commitment of the state to the eradication of all uncertainty in the polis. Arendt's solution to this quandary would be to focus on 2 of the concepts that she would later expand further in her human condition: natality and plurality. Dare I say diversity, huh? However, the concept of acting into nature has also carried that unpredictability out of the purely human world. So the idea of process underpins the modern relationship between history and nature, just as the idea of immortality underpinned the ancient one. This fact has actually been well explored in Eastern thought, where verbs generally take priority over nouns. However, Western philosophy is rather newer to this way of thinking, and it carries with it some baggage. Because this new realization came in the wake of the loss of confidence in the truth-revealing capacity of the senses, it comes tinged with despair, as Arendt has it, and so it is in this mindset that the Western world comes to consider the problems and the dangers of action. In part 2, Arendt opens then by suggesting that this shift towards process is the starkest point of division between the past and the modern age, and we are best to interpret this shift as the separation of the universal from the particular, which entails that the meaning is no longer found in particular things themselves, as the ancient ideas had all had it, but rather it was found in the overarching and universal process. This fact and its association with science is the basis for what I will call the Heisenberg-Arendt dichotomy, which we can summarize thus. The advances of modern science, especially in the 20th century, have enabled a technology that has allowed humans to feasibly claim to have conquered nature. But it has simultaneously undermined our ability to take any coherent meaning from the products of our new stature. In the first section of part 2, Arendt suggests that previous models of history assumed that modern secular values evolved out of the Roman Christian tradition. However, she wishes to refute this. This idea, she says, is based on 3 foundations of the Christian worldview: a rectilinear concept of time, a pattern for the way the world is, styled as a divine purpose, and a devaluation of the particulars of the physical world. Immortality still had the true value, but it was no longer to be found on earth. Arendt bases this traditional view in Augustine, but she argues that secularization of Christianity was not his true purpose and cannot be supported from his view. Augustine primarily argued against cyclical models of history to defend the theological uniqueness of Christ's coming on earth. However, he did not refute the very idea of a concept of history in general, and his concept of Christian time having both a beginning and end would have been entirely alien to the modern concept of the time stream, where both past and future stretch off into infinity. Kind of. Out of this new time sequence and the modern shift towards process comes a new form of earthly immortality which Arendt puts in place of any of the ancient models. This time sequence is also the ultimate repository of meaning, with the strict uniqueness of the whole bestowing strict uniqueness onto each individual part. This earthly immortality seems to me to be rather similar to Carl Sagan's star stuff. Meaning comes from the knowledge that we are all born out of this vast cosmic process. In the second section of part 2, Arendt says that all of the foregoing leads us up to the late 18th century and the philosophy of Hegel, who sought to turn all of history into a single unbroken continuity of spirit. This unification of history into an unbroken continuum, according to Arendt, bypasses rather than solves the riddle of the rise of the secular. And the sticking plaster that was laid over this was to say that the old theological frameworks had evolved into the modern secular ones somehow. Arendt rejects this on the basis of what she said in 2.1, and she sees the modern focus on history to be a turning towards all of history for meaning, not just any one text. As such, the transcendent has receded and secularization was the result, a discrete historical shift from a world in which the divine influenced the political to a world in which it did not. Arendt is very clear that there should always be a public place for religion, but never a political one. One reason for this is that transcendent beliefs begin to enable wild leaps of logic. A transcendent premise can be a premise for almost anything. Thus, the loss of confidence in Platonic ideals comes to pass, and we turn back to the secular realm and the body politic in an effort to uphold the space of remembrance. But no body politic survives indefinitely, and so all three of the types of worldly immortality that Arendt mentions here have some points of failure in maintaining the remembrance in the face of the vastness of the continuous time stream that constitutes the modern concept of history. However, in an ironic twist, it was the vita contemplativa which eschewed the worldly realm that would come to inherit the world following the breakdown of the Roman Empire, which is where Christianity as a political force began, and it was left to poor Augustine to cobble together a justification for this in the city of God, which sanctifies the community and thus enables the concept of Christian politics to not be a contradiction in terms. This thread of community is what Arendt ties to her own idea of plurality. The human world is a social world by definition. The third section of part 2 is a bit of a roundup in which Arendt says that we can plausibly say that the Greco-Roman Judeo-Christian tradition did not lead us directly to the secular world of today and its values. However, we must equally say that secularization did not restore the lost sense of meaning. We could neither maintain the immortal soul nor return to the idea of immortal fame. We could neither look back towards meaning in the past nor project meaning into the future. History is itself the very meaning of everything, and each moment takes its uniqueness from the uniqueness of the whole. This is a very alien way of looking at these things, but the question remains as to how we, as mere humans, might be able to get just a glimpse of that whole, because we still thirst for immortality of some kind. Part 3, and we are told by Arendt then that the historical consciousness is now what nature was in antiquity and the divine pattern was in the Roman Christian era. It is the aspect of reality which imparts meanings to other things through its ability to bestow immortality. Prior to this, in the modern age, an attempt was made to turn action and politics into the field that gives meaning to human life. Thinkers like Hobbes making a model that allowed us to focus on the future that we might act towards. By contrast, Hegel, like Vico before him, insisted that meaning must be derived from something in the past that we are able to reflect back upon, and drove the shift from politics to history. However, then came Marx, and, in a move that Arendt seems to regard as simultaneously brilliant and tragic, he tried to synthesize the political focus on the future with the historical processes of Hegel, leading him to try and make history in some sense, by treating human processes with the same focus as natural processes, because in some non-trivial way, they are natural processes. But the Heisenberg-Arendt dichotomy manifests itself in the fact that this social naturalism of Marx may at once be absolutely true and fundamentally unproductive or irreducible past a certain point. Arendt identifies three ways in which Marx's project seems to fail. First, the modern concept of history denies that there can be an ending, and so history can never be finished in the way that Marx envisages. Second, such an ending would seem to trivialize all of history except the very end. And thirdly, this kind of model of history encourages people to hastily and incautiously assume that they have discovered the moving parts of history, like class struggle, for instance. Arendt expands now from just Marxian theories to all utilitarian theories, inasmuch as those theories will always base themselves on a model of some future good, and in so doing they will lose an awareness of the present moment. That is to say, what is the use of use? The critique of utilitarianism is a fair one, but Arendt claims that it fails because truth cannot be made or fabricated. It can only disclose or reveal itself, and this sounds rather like adherence to a religious doctrine, and honestly, I don't get that from Arendt here either, as she then goes on to pinpoint the final shift from the political to the historical as the failure of the French Revolutionary calendar, when Renaissance Europe realized that no, you can't just found a new tradition in the model of antiquity. Modernity has changed the game. The first to fully appreciate this was Kant, who reluctantly introduced a concept of history into his political philosophy because action was powerless to overcome the melancholy haphazardness, whereas with history there was always at least a story to be told. Arendt says that it was Kant who first explored the tripartite aspects of the vita activa, although she would go on to expand on this, and her model asserts that the active life consists in labour, work and action. That is, to sustain life, to build a world, and then finally to enable a polis of individuals. Unfortunately though, action was not suitable for the task that Kant required of it, to maintain the political sphere. In the end, it was history that resembled action and so performed this function for a while at least, providing something like the immortal space which the body politic would once have fulfilled in ancient times. But history is now beginning to strain under the pressure of the modern world, and with that I think I have just barely landed the narrative plane on part 3 of this essay. So my entirely amateur takeaway from the concept of history is that while the ancient world had an immortal view of nature where people were the mortals, and the Roman Christian world had an immortal view of the mind and ideas in a world that was mortal, the modern world has now realized that both humanity and nature are mortal, and the only earthly immortality is to be found in the time sequence itself. This leads us to the epilogue, which is Arendt's description of the grand crisis of modernity once again. We are left in a place where neither the traditional models nor the obvious responses to them appear to be convincing for the new paradigm into which we have unwarily slid. Even objective natural science can become vulnerable to this, although Arendt is, for the most part, focused on the political impacts and totalitarianism in particular. And towards the end, she makes the concerning claim that it is those totalitarian regimes which appear to be doing for the realm of human psychology what the natural sciences have done for human artifice. Now, never let it be said that Arendt is above a grandiose soundbite, but this is a concerning claim nonetheless, and it points back to the fundamental problem of politics since Plato, the justification of power. Arendt will exposit, but not solve, this problem in the 3rd and 4th essays, What is Authority and What is Freedom? And these will be the final stages of my amateur journey between past and future. Bye for now.